You're listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. Margins and Meaning accepts zero responsibility for remakes, delaminations, fractures, open contacts, poor scans, missing opposings, non-index bites, or any case that miraculously hits your inbox without a requested shade. Anything I say on the show is just my opinion. It's not gospel. It's not CE. It's not legal advice, and it definitely may induce emotional damage. Please, if you choose to listen to anything that was discussed here today, you do so at your own risk, preferably with a full night's sleep, sharp burrs, and a clinician who actually realize that there is, in fact, more shades in the shade guide than just A2. Listen at your own risk. Thank you. Welcome back to Margins and Meaning. I am John Wilson, and this is our first milestone. 10 episodes in, and I'm so proud of the fact that we're going strong and having fun, and the little show is starting to grow. You know, when I first started this, I wasn't sure anybody would be interested in this. I wasn't sure that the message that I had to share and the way that I'm sharing it would be relatable and fun, but over the last 8 or 9 episodes, I've gotten to feel a little more comfortable with the delivery, a little more comfortable with the medium, and I'm starting to be able to flow a little bit better with this stuff. At least that's how I feel. You know, leave a little comment. Let me know what you actually think, what you'd like to hear about. I'd like to be able to tailor the show to be most effective to the audience. But today we're going to move forward. Last show, we were talking about what I called the standards. You know, not perfection, not ego and dressed up as something else, but I'm telling you this, you know, I don't have the authority. I don't have all the answers, but the answers that I share with you have been my truth. It's been my success. It allows me to move forward in a predictable manner, and I think that's what we're really looking for in this industry. So when I talk about the standards, that's my minimum. It's the minimum that you enforce so your outcomes become repeatable. It's non-negotiable. You have to be able to have the space minimum. Today, I want to show you where that standard actually begins. It certainly doesn't start in the mill or in the software design or when the case is already on fire. It begins when the information shows up. You know, records, you know, they sound like something administrative. It sounds like maybe a checklist you run just to say you did. Sounds like something you do before the real work starts. But I can tell you, if you lived in this trade long enough, you know that that is 100% backwards. The records aren't the hoop. The records are the actual work. Your outcome follows intention, and intention follows understanding. You heard me just harp on this because today, understanding begins at the records. So today is about truth. Again, my truth, sharing with you freely. The minimum amount of truth you need to build something predictable and how to ask for that truth without turning that relationship into a fight. That's the goal. That's what we're after. That's what I'm going to share today. All right, guys, let's get into it. You know, guys, in last episode, I touched on this lie. You know, there's a lie in dentistry that kind of sounds like strength. Sounds like you have some special capabilities that maybe your competition doesn't have. Sounds like confidence, maybe a little more experience. And early on, it can actually feel a little bit like pride. If I'm good enough, I can make just about anything work. Most technicians I know, myself included, have had a season where that sentence actually carried the whole business. You know, I didn't have a reputation yet. I didn't have any real leverage in this industry. I certainly didn't have the wait list that I have today for clients. I had rent, I had payroll, I had boxes of responsibility. So you become that person who compensates. You figure things out. You find a way. You do the impossible at 10:30 on a Friday night with one eye half closed and a half-drunk cup of coffee in front of you because you need the focus, because you have no opportunity to have a failure. And for a while, maybe you're kind of in a sick way proud of that. You feel useful. But then the work starts teaching you a different lesson. The lesson is that compensation is not a system. Compensation is you paying for somebody else's missing information. You paying for that bite that was never verified. You paying for that opposing that was completely distorted. You paying for that scan that stitched some ridiculous fantasy story that wasn't really capturing reality. You're paying for that A2 shade that had no photos. And you're certainly paying for that timeline that's just pure fantasy. And guys, you just don't pay that one time. You pay it 100 small different ways. You pay for it in that extra adjustment. You pay for it in the rebates that nobody wants to admit were actually maybe avoidable. You pay for it on Friday night when you're redesigning. You pay for it in that quiet little tension when your team sees a case come back that everybody already knows what's coming next. And then the worst thing happens, you start paying for it at home. You carry that day with you. You walk in the door thinking about all the problems that you have to deal with tomorrow. You're still thinking about that shade that was never going to match, but somehow it left the lab. Because those records were maybe just a single word. You're still thinking about that call you didn't make early enough because you just didn't want it to be seen as difficult. Guys, that's why I'm doing this episode, because the truth is when the records are weak, everything downstream becomes emotional. And once the work becomes emotional, it gets expensive, not just financially. You expense the energy. You expense this lack of peace. The expense of pride that makes you want to do things differently. You expense maybe that feeling of, can I do this for another 20 years? So the goal is not to become rigid. The goal is to stop gambling. We don't gamble with our name. We don't gamble with the patient. We don't gamble with our team. We ask for what we need to win. Non-negotiable. And if you want this shortest version of this episode, it's this. Records are the first standard. If you don't protect the inputs, you spend your life trying to defend the output. Now, let me tell you the first time that I really understood that. So I've said it before on this show, there are seasons in this trade that shape you, mold you, even in your life. It just brings you to the person that you are today. Not because they're romantic or easy, but maybe because they're difficult. Maybe because they're relentless. I can tell you in my garage years, I didn't have that fancy facility. I had heat and noise and a cheap workbench slapped together with some plywood and 2x4s. I had this feeling in my chest that didn't go away until that case was out the door and ultimately paid for. And even then, it really didn't fully go away because I was often thinking about what I could have done better. You know, those years taught me a lot about craftsmanship, but they also taught me something even more important. You know, the case doesn't start when you first touch the wax. It starts when you decide that you're willing to accept what's given to you as records. I remember a simple denture case. It wasn't complicated on paper, but it was the kind of case that kind of tells you that something's not quite right. It came in with this mush bite, and it kind of looked okay. You know, the heels of the retromolar pads and hemular notches kind of lined up, so I felt somewhat good about it. But as soon as I started setting it up, it just started fighting me. Just fought me all along the way. The occlusion was not working well. I just couldn't get the movements right on this case. And guys, you know that feeling when you're adjusting and adjusting and adjusting, and it starts acting like this thing is alive and is fighting you. It's not the type of denture tooth. It's not the mold you chose. It's the record that's fighting you. So I did what every young technicians do. I worked it harder. I stayed later. I adjusted more. I tried to force the case into being obedient. And the case finally looked okay. Not proud of it, but maybe okay. So we send it. Then it came back, and of course it did. And here's the thing. When a case comes back, the first emotion is always the same. It's a punch to the gut. Even when it's not your fault, it feels personal. Because, guys, your hands touched it. Your name is attached to this. So you open the box up, you look at it, you start doing the math. What can I fix? What can I adjust? How fast can I turn this sucker around? But this time, instead of jumping into the workbench, I slow down a bit. I look at the bite again, and I start realizing that this bite was never correct. Maybe it was closed into a CR, but it was never really an MIP. It was present, but I certainly didn't call it authoritative. I had to build this case entirely on a story that I didn't really believe from the beginning. That moment I learned something that feels really obvious now, but it wasn't obvious then. When the bite's not right, the case becomes a negotiation, right? My negotiation. And the lab, my lab, your lab, everybody's lab is going to lose that negotiation. Because the lab isn't the mouth. And no matter how much we think we know what's going on here, we are going to be wrong more times than not. So I called that office, and it wasn't a really polished script that I had to give them back in the day. I wasn't trying to sound like some sort of consultant. I was just trying to survive and do good work. But I remember being calm, and not because I felt calm. God knows I was nervous inside, but I knew I needed to be calm. I said, I can't make this case predictable off the bite we have. I'd like you to take a new bite, and let's verify it. That was it. Simple, direct. And they did it. And when that new bite came in, the case stopped fighting me. It's funny, the same hands, the same material, same technicians doing it. It's just turning into a different truth. That case taught me what standards are for, because I started looking at getting away with not saying good enough. Standards aren't there to make you feel important. The standards are there in my mind to make the work repeatable. And repeatability is what protects your margins and your meaning. Let's talk about the modern version of that same problem, because when I moved into digital, it didn't eliminate this. Digital just made it easier to hide, faster to get around, but didn't solve the problem. Guys, digital dentistry is very powerful. We know it's faster, it's cleaner, it can be unbelievably accurate when the fundamentals are really respected. But digital also has this dark side, a side that maybe many people don't really talk about. Digital can make a lie look elegant. File can look clean and still be so wrong. That scan can look smooth and still be distorted. A bite can be closed and still be very unstable. And that's why some of the worst remakes I've seen in the last decades were these, what I call beautiful failures. Let me explain. We'll get a full arch case in. It's one of those cases. It might be coming from an office that doesn't do a bunch of big cases. They're proud of it. They've worked hard. They have these big expectations, and you're charging big money. So there's going to be big pressure on this case. The office is excited. The tone feels confident. The timeline may be a little aggressive, but you accept the case. And that file comes in, and visually it's impressive. It's a bunch of preps. Everything looks like it should. But something tells you something's off just a little bit. You can't really track it down in first glance, but You start to rotate that model and look at the tissue, look at the margins. You try to figure out the scan path that they took, what scanner they're using, and trying to put a finger on what you feel is maybe slightly wrong. You get to the bite, and at first glance, it looks like it's somewhat in the right position, but you can't really tell. But the more you look at it, the more it feels off. That occlusal relationship doesn't feel like it's been anything other than just guided to position. There's no real authority to it all. There's no gravity. There just is something wrong. It's like that model's telling, hey, come on, buddy, just trust me. It looks good, right? Let's go for it. And you know what? For many years, we would just design around it. And I can tell you, there's a million different ways for us to overcome less than perfect relations. We'd soften up the cusp anatomy. We'd build in forgiveness into the centric relation. We would reduce any interferences. All these little tricks were just compensating for somebody else's problem. But I can tell you guys, that mouth doesn't care what looked reasonable on a screen. The mouth only cares what it will repeat at. So we paused. Not a dramatic pause, but just maybe responsibility. I called the office and said, we're really close on this, but this big case, this bite isn't really stable enough for predictability. If we proceed with this, I'm just going to be guessing. I didn't attack them. I didn't perform. I didn't lecture. All I did was just name the risk. And then I did something that helps more than people really realize. I explained what I meant. I said, Dog, it just looks like, you lost the centric and you were guiding them back to place. I need to have some repeatability here, and maybe we have a couple different solutions for you. And then there was a silence. And silences are very interesting, guys, because silence is sometimes that resistance. Sometimes it's a realization. And this time it was that realization. And the doctor says, okay, tell me what you need. So we get a new bite captured, the verified seating. Now it's a really clean way to move forward. And when we look at the case when it comes back in, now it makes sense. Now we can make good occlusal contact. The vertical seems correct for this relation. And we complete the case, so we deliver it, insertion goes really easily. And guys, no one on Instagram will ever know why it worked. They'll praise the design, they'll praise the material, they'll praise the aesthetic outcome. But the truth is that case succeeded because the record finally told the truth. And here's the deeper point. Digital didn't make the dentistry go any easier. Digital made the truth more important. Because now that downstream process is faster. When the truth is wrong, you can still fail faster than ever, right? So the standard is simple. The record has to be authoritative. If it's not, you just pause, you reset, you protect that outcome. Now let's move from mechanics to emotion, because records aren't just about the bite and the fit. Records are also about expectation. And the shade is where expectations get super loud. Those single anterior crowns, the ones we love to hate and hate to love. It's the most deceptive cases in dentistry. We think that back in the day, hey, it's just one unit. Should be super simple, right? It certainly isn't. We know how much emotion those single units can carry. Sometimes they're that much more difficult than the full mouth cases that we work on, because one unit sits in front of the face. That one unit gets photographed, because that one unit is how that patient maybe sees themselves. So those cases come in, and those ones that just say A2. No photos, no stump shade, no value, no really talk about translucency, nothing. We don't know if the patient wants us to match what is there or start something new. Just A2. And if you've been doing this long enough, you already know what that is. That's a future phone call. That is the future. The future that you already know, the one that says, well, hey, it just doesn't match. That is a future remake where everybody pretends nobody could have seen it coming, but you can. You know you can see it coming because A2 is not a plan. A2 is a family. A2 is that starting point. A2 is what people write when they don't want to slow down or they can't see color. So I call. Calm, simple, just factual, just saying, hey, doctor, I have this case. I know it's for this single central up front. I just cannot deliver predictability. I can't just match off a tab alone. I need at least a couple photos if you want to have something that you can be proud of. You know, the face, the smile retracted, maybe even a close-up of the tab in the same plane of the tooth. But hey, now I don't want to have this pushback. But a lot of assistants hear that as pushback. They see you as being difficult, but I'm not asking for photos to be high maintenance. I'm asking for photos because the shade is not just a single number. Shade's a value, chroma. Shade has texture. Shade has how the light is going to dance over that surface. Shade has some context. And context doesn't come through with an A2 checkbox. So they send the photos, and the photos tell the truth. The adjacent tooth has a lower value than A2. There's maybe some warmth in the cervical. There's a little halo at the incisal. There's texture that throws the light around, helps it dance. That little character that makes it look real, not like a shade tab. If I had made A2 like a block, it would have been bright and dead, and you know what? That patient would have rejected it. Still looks fake. So we build it correctly, we match the value first because value is what the eye catches before it sees anything else. We control that chroma because that chroma is going to scream at you. We create the surface texture so the light behaves in a way that the neighboring tooth really respects. We give that crown a chance to just blend. It's never going to be perfect, guys, as much as we try, but we have given it our best shot. And the crown goes in and the patient accepts it. The doctor's happy. And the reason it worked wasn't this simple ceramic recipe to get to the finish line. The reason it worked was because I had records. That photo was the record. The notes were the record. The conversation that I had was the record. And that's why when I say the records are the workflow. Records are not just the bite and the posing. Records are the understanding of it all. And if understanding is missing, that case becomes emotional, and emotional dentistry is expensive. Now let's talk about where the place where records get exposed the fastest, and that's really with implant cases. So implant dentistry, I can tell you, it's my favorite part of the trade. It is because maybe implants just don't really care about your feelings. You know, I respect implant dentistry because it's very definitive in a lot of ways. It forces honesty. You know, if the record's off, the restoration's going to punish you. So let me paint a picture here. I'm going to share a story here. You know, it's one that's happened to every one of us in this trade, but maybe how I handled it was just a little bit better. I'll share how I handled this situation. It was a frustrating time. You know, the case comes in. We design up a nice molar crown, nothing fancy, just a simple screw retain crown. You know, everything comes in fine. We design it up, mill it, finish it up. We don't see anything. But we get that call, and of course, on insert day, we get the 3-word sentence. It doesn't fit. And doesn't fit is such a vague sentence. It can mean 100 different things. It can mean maybe that scan body wasn't seated completely. Maybe the scan body was seated, but the library allowed rotation. It could mean maybe we chose the wrong library. It means a million different things until I look at the data after the fact. And the hard part is if you have your standards in place, if you have your records honored, you should have these issues, but they happen. And here's what really happens next after you get those calls. Well, people start to get defensive. And I can tell you, defensiveness makes everybody in the conversation dumber. So I try to slow down. I ask for the facts. I pull up the original case on the computer. I look at what potentially could have went wrong. And maybe at this one moment, I can see a slight, maybe float to that scan body. Maybe the connection's truth was not really captured cleanly. So we talk on the phone a little bit more. I don't lecture them. I don't talk like I'm above them. I don't talk like I have all the answers, but I share a potential. I say, hey, you know what? It looks like maybe we had an issue here, and let me show you why. You want to log on to this screen? We'll talk about it. We'll come up with a good plan so that maybe we can overcome this in the future. I'm sorry that this happened, but at this particular point, let's not just repeat the problem again. And I said, hey, maybe you can share how you're seating the scan body. What are you doing to verify it? How are you starting the scanner? What's your scan path? I ask important questions. And then they resend that scan. We get the answers. We rebuild the case, and the insert is clean. And here's the part that matters. Afterward, that doctor said something that I think that we don't often hear. I swallow hard on this because it's a truth. It's something that is so powerful. There's nothing better than when you have an experienced clinician say, hey, you know what, John, we've been doing this a long time, but nobody really explained it to us like that. And guys, that's not a compliment to me. That's just a reminder of what the lab is really there to do. The lab is often that modern workflow. The lab is not just manufacturing. The lab is maybe that translation. The lab can be seen and felt as the leaders. And leadership has value. We're protecting that understanding along the way, and that's why the standards around the records are so important. Because if you guys don't protect those records, you become the dumping ground for everybody else's chaos. Missing information becomes your problems, and, those unverified seedings becomes your problem. Fantasy timelines become those problems. And if your business becomes that dumping ground, your life follows it. That's just the truth. That's just math. Now, you've heard these case files. You've heard me explain these principles. I've shared a clean version that you can actually build a system around. And that's what we're here for. Guys, here's the principle. This is what I'm trying to get across today. Your records are the minimum amount of truth you need to make the next decision real. Not a perfect truth. Not every case needs to be a thesis of some sort. Just enough truth that the workflow becomes predictable. Because, guys, a workflow is nothing more than just a series of decisions, right? Design decisions, your material decisions, the occlusion decision, the aesthetic decision, the timeline decision. And guys, when records are weak, every decision after that becomes maybe a guess. And guesses actually compound, right? People love to blame the end of the chain. They blame that crown. They blame the zirconia. They blame the shrinkage. They blame the mill. They blame the printer. They blame maybe even the cement. But most of the time, the failure was already there in front of you. That bite didn't repeat. The posing didn't tell the real truth. The photos were non-existent. The notes were vague, and the expectations weren't even spoken. So the work becomes reactive, and reactive work destroys your margin. Now, maybe we can separate records into two kinds of truth, because I think this helps technicians and clinicians speak the same language. Number one, maybe is the mechanical truth. The bite, the opposing, margins, the scan body interface, things that physically are or are not. Number two, maybe is the more difficult one, the aesthetic truth. Value, texture, translucency, the age, the personality, the things that make the restoration just disappear in the face instead of looking like a product. We know that both truths matter. The mechanical truth keeps us from failing. The aesthetic truth keeps us from disappointing, and disappointment is its own kind of failure. And here's the part that people don't want to hear. Truth sometimes slows you down. A bite takes more time. A rescan takes time. Photos take time. All of the clarification takes time. But guys, time spent early is cheap. Time spent late is obviously very expensive. And once the case is at insert, well, you're no longer paying in minutes. You're paying in emotion. Because that's when somebody gets embarrassed. That's when somebody gets defensive. That's when the patient gets upset. And that's when your team becomes stressed. So the standard is simple. We don't delay the truth. We don't gamble. We run a record standard the same way a pilot runs a checklist. Not because they're afraid, because they respect the consequences. Now, guys, let me give you a tool. The one that you can copy into your notes and build into your own processes. Let's get to it. So all of this is to culminate into what I call the record standard. This is what really runs before you design or mill anything, before you promise some timeline that you're absolutely going to regret. And I'll tell you how I think about it today because, this entire system has helped me stop feeling overwhelmed. Doesn't force me to treat every case like it needs a full-on investigation. I try to make it simple and I do what I call triage. Green light, yellow light, red light. Well, green light means the records tell enough truth to move forward with confidence. We'd love every case to have that, but the truth is most cases fall into what I call yellow light. It's close, but maybe there's one variable that needs clarity. And we're going to proceed after a quick call, maybe a quick photo, a quick correction of some time. We don't pretend it's perfect and fine. We actually wait until we align. Now, red light is the ones that really will kick us in the butt if we're not strong enough. We know that there's nowhere near enough information to proceed. And if we decide to go forward, we're guessing, we take the responsibility. I don't want to do that any longer. I pause. That's it. Now, what really triggers those colors? Let's be honest. Let's talk like we're talking in a lab here, not the way you're going to write them in a textbook. Obviously, the bite. The bite is everything on these bigger cases. If it doesn't look correct, if it's not repeatable, if it looks like the patient was forced into this position that they will never find again, well, that's red. The opposing. Is it complete? Is it mostly there? Because occlusion is relational, right? If you don't have that relationship, you're just building in the dark. The margins and their readability. Can you actually see what you're supposed to build to? If the file looks like some watercolor painting, don't pretend it's some sort of blueprint. Intention. Do you know what the doctor is actually trying to accomplish here? Make it nice is not intention. A2 is not intention. Patient wants wider. It's not intention. Intention is match, change, age, texture, personality. What are we protecting? What are we improving? What does success actually look like? Photos. Photos matter. Anterior work needs photo. High aesthetic work needs photos. Anything emotional needs to have photos. If you don't have photos, we don't have aesthetic truth. Our timeline. Timeline is real. Is it real? Can we make it happen? Their urgency is not a plan, guys. If the timeline is fantasy, you either reset or you decide that you're going to accept the chaos. And chaos isn't free, guys. Now, I want to say something important about this tool. This tool is there so that you can actually measure. It's not there to make you feel powerful. The tool is there to help your team maybe breathe a little bit better. Because when the standards are clear, your best technicians stop getting punished for other people's missing information. They stop getting dragged into the remakes that they could see coming. They stop burning weekends and fixes that were actually really avoidable if people stopped losing pride. Standards protect pride, and pride is one of the most fragile things in a laboratory. Now, once you decide on the color, green, yellow, or red, the next step is always the same. You communicate. And this is where most people struggle. So let's talk about that really important call. Now, I'm here to tell you my favorite thing is understanding which tools are most valuable in my life. And the telephone has become my relevance. It's become my secret weapon because the phone is my best dental instrument. And I know a lot of people hate that sentence because it makes them feel uncomfortable, but I think it's so true. Because the phone is where you protect your variables. The phone is where you stop resentment from being born. The phone is where you become more than just that vendor, but maybe a real true partner. And I also understand why technicians avoid the phone. Well, I know you don't want to be seen as difficult. You don't want to cause friction. You don't want the potential of losing a client. You don't want to feel like you're telling the doctor how to do their own darn job. I've felt all of that. But here's what experience teaches you. If you avoid that call, you don't avoid friction. You just postpone it. You postpone the friction that comes back way louder. So that call has to be calm, clean, the outcome focused. And here's the structure I use. I start with alignment. I say something like, doctor, hey, you know what? I'm on your side. I want the same outcome you want. And then I name the truth. I reviewed the records and we're close. But I can't get predictable with what I have. Then you name one variable. The bite isn't authoritative. The opposing is incomplete. The photos aren't sufficient for a single anterior tooth. The scan body isn't captured cleanly. One thing. Then I give a path forward. If we reset this now, the rest of the case becomes that much more straightforward. And then I ask what I need. I need a new bite captured. I need a new opposing. I need 4 photos. I need a rescan. Then I close with action. Once I have that, I can move forward immediately. That's it. No lecture, no blame, no performance, just leadership. Now let me tell you something that will make this easier. When you do this consistently, that relationship, it really sorts itself out. The good clinicians will respect you more. The average clinicians will improve. The chaotic clinicians get irritated. And yes, sometimes those chaotic clinicians leave, and that's fine. It used to scare me a little bit. Now it feels like relief. I love it. Because the clinician who gets angry at the truth that you're telling them something that's going to help them, they're telling you they want speed without structure. They're telling you that they want you to absorb that chaos. They're telling you that you are the lab. It's your responsibility to carry without having the given information that's required to carry it. And guys, that's not partnership. That's a dumping ground. And if you let your lab become the dumping ground, it will become your life. So the standard isn't just we ask for new records. The standard is why we ask and how we ask and how early we ask, and we ask every damn time. Because consistency is what makes it feel normal instead of confrontational. Now, one more thing. When you make these calls, you have to own your part too. If the lab screws up, and we always do, it happens. You got to own it. If the lab made an assumption on their own, the lab should have called earlier. You have to own it. Ownership is the fastest way to keep a relationship clean, because the goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to win the case. Now let's bring this back to margins and meaning, because that's the real reason any of this actually matters. So let's try to close strong with this and tie it all together. The truth of the matter is records protect the margins in very obvious ways. It's very obvious. You're going to have fewer remakes. You're going to have fewer emergency adjustments. You're going to have fewer of those last-minute redesigns, fewer of those drop-everything moments where that particular case is going to light the whole place on fire. But the real win, what I really see as the real win, is what it does to the day. When the record tells the truth, the day becomes calmer. Maybe not easier, but calmer, more predictable. And predictability is peace, my friends. I can tell you, I lived the opposite. I lived in that season where when the phone rang, your stomach would drop, where your team got quiet when the boxes came back in, where you were constantly in what I call reaction mode, always behind, always compensating, always in that making it work mode. That season doesn't just destroy the margins, it erodes the meaning of it all. It makes you show up at home already spent, makes you shorter with the people you love. It makes you lose joy in the craft. So this is not a small thing, guys. A record standard is the simplest way to protect the life that has to hold this business together. And that's why it belongs right after episode 9. The standard is the line. Records are where that line is tested first. So here's the closing thought. When you accept weak records, you're not being flexible. You're choosing chaos. When you ask for truthful records, you're not being difficult. You're protecting the outcome. You're protecting that relationship. You're protecting the patient. But most of all, you're protecting your team and your own sanity. So guys, thank you for listening to episode 10 of Margin and Meaning. Next episode, we're going to go deeper into the phone. The actual framework for saying the hard thing without burning trust, without burning that office down, without burning yourself out. And guys, if this show has value to you, please tell one technician, tell a clinician who still cares about doing things the right way. And if you have a case that's causing you pain or some situation in your laboratory, send it in. I'll turn it into an episode. I'll break it down, not to embarrass anybody, but maybe, just maybe, to help the next person not make the same mistakes. So guys, this is John Wilson for Margins and Meaning. Protect your margins, protect your meaning, and start with the record. Thank you.